Hello, everyone. Very good afternoon. We now move forward with the next session in a row with an electric line of speakers deliberating on software-defined financial infrastructure. Enhanced security and compliance while infrastructure going simpler, faster, and cleaner. We would like to invite Dr. Sriram, CU from Cybersecurity Center of Excellence at DSCI, and the session would be moderated by Dr. Sriram. And the next panelist, we have Mr. Shiju Rathwa, who's the Chief Information and Technology Officer at Care Ratings Limited. Next panelist, we have Mr. Sridhar Oblicity, who's the CEO of Amphino. Our next panelist, we have Mr. Narayan Neelkantan, who's the co-founder and CEO of Block Armor. Over to you, Dr. Sriram.
Hello, good evening, everyone. Hope you can hear me. Hello, hope you can hear me well. The other panelists?
Okay. Yes, we can.
Yes.
We can hear you.
Dr. Sriram. So we bring you a very interesting topic, very contemporary as well as futuristic. Software-defined infrastructure, essentially how it's going to influence our financial world. So software-defined infrastructure, first of all, is the definition consists of fully virtualized compute, networking, and storage resources that are logically pooled and can be managed as if they were software. So this allows for policy-based infrastructure provisioning and enables automation. So it provides extreme flexibility and scale and power in control. So those are of course, the benefits. And the things that come to mind readily are software-defined networks in telecom, and of course, what Facebook has also been working with, telecom infrastructure project and such. Okay. HP also at different companies, ranging from HP to IBM, all the big ones have their own hyper-converged infrastructure, software infrastructure, and what they're working on is constantly evolving. So with this, what I would do is start off, and given the time constraints and all, I request you to be concise and also crisp so that the takeaways for the audience are really good. And if you have, Sridhar, I think you had something to put up, so please feel free to do so when your turn comes. So the first of all, so we have introduced a stellar cast, a real good panel, people who are really the leading lights in what they are doing. So the first one, what are the top 3 ways financial institutes, BFSI sector can leverage SDI? And of course, the top 3 benefits that SDI can bring to your org, given that it is not a small move, it is a heavy move. It's not likely to be a small incremental move in terms of time, resources, and money, but it's a move that brings significant benefit. So I would start with Shiju.
Thank you, Dr. Sriram. Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, all the panelists. I think it's a very good question. How does it make impacts for the financial institutions? It's not for the financial institutions, I would say for everyone, because today go-to-market is one of the biggest strategy what is everyone is adopting. When we talk about the go-to-market, the time is the key aspect out over there. And today, if someone has to productize a platform, how soon they hit the floor, then only the ROI can start hitting onto it. And how soon they bring in the platform which is much more mature or much more beneficial to the customers or the consumers. That's how the productivity comes in. So I would see it's 3 factors wherein the benefits which comes for the financial institutions are built. One is for the easy to build, second is easy to operate, and third is from secure or from operate from governance point of view. Because today when you want to build something, if it's already been there in terms of software defined infrastructure, you can spin it up over the seconds, over the minute. You can go ahead, downgrade it, upgrade it, scalability perspective, resilience perspective. So that's the one benefit which you get it. Second, operation perspective, because when we talk about in financial institutions, the uptimes are much more critical, and the much more critical is the cost of managing that operations. So how do you bring in the cost? Because end of the day, it's proportionally equal. The cost gets accumulated for the customer. So how do you bring in more efficiency to the customers also for the consumption perspective? So unless you operate these infrastructure through automated processes, you will never be able to bring down the operating cost. and that's how the software defined help us to bring in the leverage in terms of the operations. Third, much more critical for any of the financial institutions, since it's governed, since it's whole lot of PI data, since it's work on the transactional of the commercials, you need to have a secured platform. So how do you monitor it? So definitely you cannot have people sitting it monitoring different infrastructures, different platforms, different number of people's different eyes. So you need to automate it. You may have to correlate all those vectors, threat vectors, and may have to take some sort of actions also through the automation processes. So that's how all these 3 points, what I would see, helps financial institutions to gain much benefit out of software defined infrastructure. That's from my
Sure.
side, Dr. Shia.
That's well said, and those are the really enlightening points. Which is what people look forward to. On one side, you have microservices and all this coming up in a strong way, and you have the other one. I mean, you have container-based systems and all built, but it enabled. The whole infrastructure is being enabled. The underlying infrastructure should be able to support all of these. So that's important. So next, I will move to Narayanan, Block Armor, and ask him to share his views.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Sriram, and it's a pleasure being here as part of this elite panel. So I think from where kind of Shiju, explained, exactly how the benefits can be derived out. Now I'll try to, kind of give a couple of examples on what really is happening, right? At least in the Indian context. So if you look at software-defined infrastructure, right, apart from virtualization, which happens within an organization, pretty much, the thought process that most organizations have today is, it has to be on cloud, which is not really the case. Because the moment we say that it has to move to cloud, then again, automatically, there is a negative thought process which comes in, where is the data located? Because in BFSI, data regulations are of paramount importance. So how can organizations get the benefits of a software-defined infrastructure without kind of compromising on the regulatory aspects of things or privacy aspects of things? So one of the things which we have seen, especially during COVID, is of course the adoption of Office 365. Right now, Office 365 might not be something which an organization has set up within its environment, but it's a very good example of adoption of a software infrastructure, right? Although it's an application in itself, but it's laid the kind of ground for organizations to open up in terms of the mindset. So I think if you ask me, everybody understands these benefits, but then still nobody is taking those initial steps which are required to kind of break the ice and move forward. I think this has been a great step, whether because of COVID or otherwise. And now we see quite a few organizations also trying to virtualize their network, right? I think compute virtualization has already happened. Network virtualization is what they're trying to do with SD-WAN primarily, because you can, optimize your network to a large extent. You can reduce your costs on the network side. Storage virtualization, I have not come across too much. I think people are still trying to figure that part out. But net, those the trends are very positive because, of course, like Siju mentioned, the benefits are there. So if you look at statistics, minimum 20% of cost savings is guaranteed, right? And this is just by virtualizing the infrastructure. Now, once the infrastructure gets virtualized, then you start building applications based on a virtualized infrastructure, and automatically your total ROI keeps increasing. So the real benefit is over a period of a few years when the entire stack, including the application and the organization strategy, moves in that direction, right? And you kind of leverage this entire infrastructure. So I think it's very important to take these initial baby steps and then have a long-term goal in terms of leveraging the entire benefits and not just worry about that point in time 20% cost saving, but rather look at the big picture.
Sure. Thank you very much. So, Sridhar, would like your insights on this topic.
Thank you so much, Dr. Sriram, Shiju, and Narayanan. Thank you so much for your comments as well. I am going to bring a slightly different perspective I'm going to talk about some of this from the US banking side. And I have a couple of things I wanted to share with you. So give me a second here.
Yes, we can see your slide.
Yeah. So I don't kind of mean to refer to the Indian banking industry, but at least the US banking industry is way behind all the other markets here, right? Because I think India has a tremendous benefit of having started with the UPI infrastructure and a number of things that have happened, whereas US is still working on an infrastructure that was built 40, 50 years ago, right? So if you look at especially financial institutions in the US, they need to offer a number of hyper-personalized services at scale and do this at where customers live, shop, and work, right? Instead of expecting the customers to go to the bank, and a lot of FIs are trying to provide these services where customers live, shop, and work, right? And for them to offer these services and react to and respond to a large variety of events, customer events at scale, it's not that easy, right? You need to imagine you have to do AI-driven personal financial assistance. You want to analyze your transaction data and do some automatic generation of things like expense reimbursement requests and do a lot of things that are aspirational for banks here. The only way to do it is through software-defined infrastructure, right? It's very essential to help financial institutions, especially in the US, innovate like the likes of Facebook, Amazon, Netflix, and Google. And what we have done, Dr. Sriram, we've spent a lot of time with you as well. We've spent about 1,100 man-years building a software-defined fintech infrastructure to help digitize banks and to build new fintech solutions, right? Our vision is to make the process of building a hello, Dr. Shirab, am I audible?
Yes, you are audible. You are audible.
Yeah. So our vision is to make this process of building a fintech solution as easy as building a website, right? And doing this is impossible without a SDI infrastructure, right? So we have done a lot of work, but we still have a long journey ahead of us. But using our no-code, low-code platform, we have transformed more than 80 financial institutions in 5 continents, right? And if you look at what we've done, whether you're a bank or a merchant or a service provider, we facilitate financial transactions where and when the customer needs them, right? So we have come up with this term called Finovation, which refers to making the bank go to people instead of making the people go to bank, right? So I think there are a lot of benefits of SDI, and I'll talk about this in the next couple of rounds, but very excited to be on this panel and kind of share with you guys what we've seen in the market.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you. So that's good to know that a lot is being done in this space, that you're actually taking the market yourself. So may I move on to my next round, in which, of course, what are the things that finally, we know that it's a heavy move and we know that everybody wants, and that and it will take time to really replace the existing stuff, or maybe you need to leverage the existing stuff to build this while adding the new stuff in. So what are the 3 things that would convince the board to green light software-defined infrastructure? That means what will really move the needle from a decision-making perspective. And the 3 that SDI will help improve the cyber posture of the organization, because given the context that SDI would have the physical infrastructure, virtualization layers, software-defined capabilities, the management services, and of course, there are a whole host of things, many attributes to include intelligent virtualization, software-defined innovation, modular design, context awareness, performance focus, policy-based systems, and of course, open source, which is there. So with all this in place, this is what probably constitutes the basket of what software-defined infrastructure have. I would once again ask Shiju, could you please shed some light on it?
I think this is more from the strategy perspective, as the two other panelists have mentioned about how the SDI is helping us in terms of scalability perspective. So it's more from the strategy, how the organization is going to adopt. Now, if you ask me, definitely today's era is more looking from scalability perspective. And if you are in a on-premise data centers or on-premise locations, you are still 3 to 6 months back. Because if you want to provision anything quickly over the period of night, you will have to wait for 3 to 6 months in terms of provisioning all those computes. So that's how the strategy comes in picture. So if your strategy is something which you want overnight growth, or you want growth in terms of scalable, in terms of elastic scalability, we may have to define that strategy in place. So that's the one thing which comes in the board. So what is your business strategy? How are you aligning your business strategies with your technology strategy? So that's the one thing which we stitch in the board meetings. Moreover, the benefits which we used to put it in front of SDI, something is like it has a centralized management console which you can do always manage whether your computes are operations in whichever part of the geography. So you really don't have to be bothered whether you need to put it up resources out over there to manage or not. You really need not to bother the infrastructure facility management out over there, because it's running on the cloud. So I think that's the one thing which we have started. So if you see history also, the adoption to these sort of technologies have started gradually. So we were there once upon a time in on-premise with number of physical boxes. Then eventually we grew into the virtualization platforms, which was in-house itself. Then we realized, no, it doesn't work like that. So let's have something, a software which we can provision it out of. So that's how virtualization setup started getting provision in-house through a software. So it used to get extended to the business, and that's how they used to operate. But finally, we get to know that the infrastructure, hardwares are the bottleneck out over there for expansion. So that's how we moved completely from condo houses to apartments. So within apartment, we will have multiple facilities which will have shared facilities, and you can use and pick up and choose a la carte model and build it up as on when you want. So definitely, when you look upon over there, you will have a lot of other security services. So, for example, if you have a in-house of your own single house, you will have to build up every security features for your own. Whereas when you look for a apartment, you will have a lot of securities which features which will be shared among everyone, from CCTV, from physical security. That's how when I look upon from SDI perspective, I can pick up and choose any of the services at my need and my demand, and I can drop it at my consumption basis. So that's the feature which is helping us. So I think that's all the business strategy which we makes it up in terms of provisioning, because though this comes in cost, I'm definitely I'm saying when I talk about the ROI, I cannot provision and say that this ROI will recover within 3 months unless there is a hot cake and sell in the market through the products which get consumed, and that's how we can show the ROI. But definitely, when you want to start this journey, you will have to invest. You will have to invest in terms of technology. You will have to invest in terms of investment as a capital, and look for working over the period of time, and that's how you see the amortization of the cost which you get in the form of ROI. So some benefits which I see, it's a better security controls, because you can get all these sort of technology solutions at one single console. You can pick it up, choose, build it up, drop it, or remodify it. You can have your own features. Hardwares, you don't have to look upon for the hardwares at all, because that's the, you don't have to put in one capital investment at first go. So you can expand it, you can leverage it. So it's like elastic. Second, moreover, from the control, because performance, application performance as well. Because today, when you run in your own system, you have a lot of legacies which you will never be able to come out of over the period of time even. But when you are in cloud, when you are on software defined infrastructures, you will have new or some other technologies which keep coming in. They push you to make more modernized. So that's how you become more modernized, because today when you want to host your own applications out over there, you understand that my applications are legacy. That's how you go and keep modernizing your applications as well. So it's a 360-degree, wherein push comes from the other side also. When you modernize and you look upon to work with the services what being offered out over there, as you said about microservices and containers, Docker. So these are all the things which has pushed from other side to us, and that's how the adoption has started output over there. So I think numerous benefits out over there, which we may not be able to even complete within the 45 minutes of the panel discussions, the number of benefits what are there. But definitely benefits comes out. How do you put it up on terms of business use cases and align with your business strategies?
Yes, yes, yes. So these are all the new age things, and they should definitely operate because there is this whole composable infrastructure and the way in which you can segment, realign, recombine, probably like a Rubik's cube, the services that are and the offerings that are there in the market. And that's why you go down to something like code as infrastructure and all these new concepts coming in. So which are there? So Narayanan would like your views.
Right. So I think from a board perspective, I would say, three metrics very important for the board. One is time to market. Second is standardization. And third is, more from a regulatory perspective, how can we be on top of things? Because these are the three big risks if you look at it from an organization perspective. And the board will be very interested in kind of, having a conversation around these lines. So I would say that, time to market obviously reduces dramatically. Um, Plus, imagine a situation where time to market reduces and at the same time your cost is also reducing. Normally, you go to the board with a proposal, okay, I will do this, I will give you these advantages, but you know what, this will cost so much. But here we are talking about over a 3-year period, actually your cost is coming down, but your time to market is improving. Your overall agility to deliver to your customers is improving. That's point number one. Second is standardization. So any board you talk about, they are always worried about those outliers, which will typically come and impact your business. So those things which you would not have guessed, like for example what Siju mentioned, right? You want to roll out a new feature or you want to roll out a new application. Suddenly you realize that this application is compute intensive and what you need to throw in so much hardware, and then you realize that okay, this hardware is going to take 8 weeks to get delivered. So game over, right? Even before you have started the conversation, it's already over. So that becomes very very important when you talk about standardization, so that you have full visibility across the stack. So you exactly know what your capacity is, what your size for today, and what will be your utilization over the next 12 to 14 months, which a traditional non-SDI infrastructure can never give you. And even if you want to get that kind of visibility in a traditional infrastructure, it's a huge cost just to build that kind of visibility. And I know from my days in NSC, right, how we used to do it. So that is very important. And third is, if you see, cybersecurity is a much bigger threat today. So, looking at what is happening in the last 12, 15 months, despite COVID, in general, cybersecurity threats are more of reality than, kind of earlier what we used to say, shock and awe, right? Kind of just create the drama around it. It's not that way. Uh, it's as close to reality, as you could have imagined probably 5 years ago, and it's just going to get worse. So now, in that kind of situation, right, it makes more sense to kind of have an infrastructure which you are more in control of, right? Although not everybody will agree with me that if you go software on the one side, it is very easy to hack into software and bring down stuff, right? Yes, that threat is there, but the threat of non-standardized vulnerability, right, or vulnerabilities introduced due to non-standardization impacting your environment is much much higher, and there are statistics to prove that, because if you see, uh, if you look at the attacks that happen, they typically exploit vulnerabilities which are at least a year old. It's not like they're exploiting zero-day attacks. So if you ask me, in my view, I would rather place my bet on a standardized infrastructure where you are in more control of your vulnerabilities, where you roll out templatized systems and have granular control in terms of software level hooks into your ecosystem, coupled with, of course, the agility it gives, right? So it's kind of a win-win. Of course, the initial decision has to be made, and of course, the application landscape, not everything will support it. So I think for the board, it's very important to say that, okay, if I have, say, 500 applications in my landscape, how many can I move in the first 3 years? It cannot be a lift and shift, right? As it is, it's too expensive, and second, it's too risky from a continuity perspective. So I would say, kind of take a phased approach, and that is typically what should tell to the board.
Yes, yes. I hope the audience is noting all these good points. Okay, because that will, these are points that you can readily use next week. So that's there. So soon it will become, with all of these things taking shape, because not whether you can afford to do it, but question of whether you can afford not to do it. Okay, that would be the way it will head down now. Because once people have a taste of it, organizations, then people get it. So it better start get moving now. Over to Sridhar now. Yes, Sridhar.
Thank you, Dr. Sriram. So Shriju and Narayanan, I think, covered most of what I wanted to highlight, but I have a couple of quick points. Essentially, software-defined infrastructure can add value to your cloud deployment, but if you look at, especially a lot of banks in the US market, they are not necessarily looking at purely public cloud deployments. They're looking at how to bring in SDI into their own data center environments, right? So, a number of banks I work with, they do not use public cloud for the kind of things that, I think Shiju was talking about, but they tend to bring a lot of the similar solutions into an on-prem deployment, right? And that gives you the best of both worlds, especially if you're a Wells Fargo, you're a Bank of America, you're a First Republic Bank. The risk of putting it into public cloud in their mind is much higher, and they want to get all these benefits in their own on-prem environments, right? So what I wanted to also quickly show you is a few other perspectives from our world here that may be interesting. And if you look at SDI, essentially you have the compute services, you have the storage services, you have the network services, and then you have the hardware, right? The iron on which you put all of these things and how you tie it all together. So there are a number of very interesting players that are coming out that provide you on-prem alternatives to doing everything that an Amazon is providing and more, right? So imagine how you can use high volume data access without losing availability using inline deduplication and compression of storage objects, or how you can do automation and integration of backups, right? How can you fully manage application aware disaster recovery? Something went wrong in some part of your ecosystem. How can the system be self-healing, right? How can you maximize loads on hardware and software components, right? How can you do hot adding of capacity to legacy workloads, and also do auto bursting on modern apps, right? So there's a lot of very interesting things you can do with this software defined infrastructure that I think you can present to your board based on what you're trying to accomplish. We also have seen a lot of very interesting models around how you can build your own appliances using a set of virtual CPUs, a virtualized storage, virtualized network, and putting a lot of policies around how they can be put together in a way that they can be auto-configured, auto-tested, and application-aware, and to do adaptive monitoring. So, if I look at the benefits that you can highlight to the board or to any steering committee, they are around composability, scalability, availability, self-serviceability, utilization, and resiliency, right? So I think there's a lot of value that you can add with SDI that I think you can't ignore.
Excellent, excellent. Because you can take each one of these points which you mentioned, which three of you have mentioned, and then probably dollarize it in some sense, saying that these are the amounts that you benefit from, or these are the risks it has mitigated, and then you have your story for the board. So that's what we do on anybody who's the decision maker. So that's great to know. So feel free to definitely, I mean, the audience I'm referring to, that please reach out to us if you have any, if you need any more clarification on this. So I go on to my second round of question. Is SDI universally applicable? This is a common doubt that happens. I mean, and it's probably not only the board, but anyone else who's in this game would ask, saying that if you ask people, they were moving to that. Is SDI universally applicable today, or certain type of whichever way you call it, large, medium, small organizations, or more tech-oriented organizations, to organizations which suits only certain type of orgs, and the limitations, downside, difficulties with SDI, because people tend to ask, oh, all these are the benefits, but what's the catch? The hidden troubles that we run into. Are there any hidden problems? The problems people in the past had in IT problems, in the IT world people face were the traditional kinds of systems also. But here's this great jazzy thing. What about the maturity of the platforms, and two, the hidden problems, the vendor lock-in, the ROI, maintenance cost? Is it really future-proof, or after having done this, gone through this whole circus for 2 years, you'll find a new technology has come in and that doesn't fit in anywhere? And really, you'll have to redo many parts of the things and all in your one slowly. So these are the questions that naturally arise. So again, I would start with Shiju. Your thoughts on this?
Dr. Shyam. Yeah, thank you, Dr. Shyam. I think it's universally applicable now, because some or other way, everyone is touching now on software-defined infrastructure now. So, and thanks to pandemic, which had made everyone to touch the technology some or other way. In fact, the platform over which we are communicating now, it's also one of the example for the software-defined infrastructure. It's running on somewhere on the cloud. We don't know where it's running out of, but yes, we are all interacting very easily and comfortably. So I think everyone has started utilizing it some or other way. I think one of the good example which Narayanan has given in his starting speech for the MS O365. So I would say we have seen a lot of adoption over the last 1 year. So it had been there in the systems, a lot of new solutions, new technologies, offerings, platforms, everything was there, but adoption has started heavily over the last 1.5 years now. And I think that will continue. And that will give the boost of the things to the technologies, and specifically for the software defined, because people are not able to travel down to data centers if they had a data center. People doesn't want to work from office now, so people want to work from remotely. So I think these all things will much more applicable for all these sort of organizations. So it may be adoption may happen on bits and pieces in terms of their consumption power, one, on cases of their business use cases, but financial institutions will be much more because they touch digitally to the customers now. So banks are nowhere in physical in terms of a location. Banks move to the homes now. So banks are moving to the customers. So it's moving to the pockets now. So definitely when you want to put it up into the pockets in your mobile phone, I think you may have to have a infrastructure setup which can work on automations around the clock. So that's a one thing. But definitely, if you ask me in terms of maturity of the solutions, yes, it's under not under the matured state. It is still under getting into the matured state. We will see over the period of time the systems are getting more matured, more automated, with more lot of cognitive services which will come into that. And I think there are larger players which are working in terms of bringing in more analytics, which will help us to deliver it much more better way to the customers. That's the one thing what I look upon. And over the period of time, next couple of years, I think adoption will go 100%. So that's what I foresee today, because no one wants to keep anything. Every organization is moving up in terms of reducing the operating cost, and the bigger operating cost is the network which works in the organization. It doesn't mean that organizations taking away jobs, but definitely those jobs are putting it up to the right segment. So who can operate it out, who can manage them well, who the skill sets. And today the biggest challenge for us is that getting the skill sets to manage the technologies which we deploy in house. So we are not in a business of in terms of information technology as a core. So definitely managing a team of IT and giving them complete 24 by 7 food for thought for a new technology has become very challenging. So definitely we leverage on the technology platforms with the partners who comes and can give the complete skill sets on a services basis to us, as well as to that skill sets a lot of foods to eat in terms of the technology. So I think that I foresee in the next couple of years. So there will be huge adoption in terms of software-defined infrastructure.
Definitely good thoughts, Shiju. And a few things I would like to add from my side are that the speed at which and the variety and flexibility with which you can roll out services, that's become very important. Just imagine around Diwali time or New Year time, entirely new scale of services and a new variety of services. The clunky old system would be, match up to that. And then the competition and all that, while they are scaling up and rolling out these, you would be not disclosing your discounts, vouchers, new varieties of things, trying out new services. These would all become very, very difficult indeed. Imagine that if some IPL match or Olympics is happening in your town, and suddenly there's a huge width requirement because all the new varieties of ways in which you can things flexibly roll out, that would become very difficult with the
Yeah.
old
To manage
existing
a
infrastructure.
periodic purge, yeah, to manage a periodic purge, it's you need these sort of services. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. So, Narayan, again, would like your views on this.
Sure, Dr. Sriram. So, like anything, right? Not just technology, but anything in this world, there are always pros and cons. So, I think there are a lot of pros, and we need to manage the cons. And as long as the pros are greater than the cons, you go ahead and adopt it, right? That's the simple way of making the decision. If you ask me, I see three big challenges in when you adopt HDI. First challenge, of course, is not all organizations are will be fully ready. So let us say, like I mentioned earlier, right? They might have a huge application landscape, like most of the. Let us take the example of insurance. So the more complicated the application or the business use case, there might be some dependency on legacy infrastructure, and it might not, because see, your cloud platform, let us say, even if you want to build your own cloud, let us say private cloud, right, not just public cloud, it does not support all operating systems, right? It can't, because it's a more futuristically built ecosystem. So if you are still stuck on some kind of legacy operating system, which I know that many insurance companies are still working on DB2, you can't do that on this kind of environment, right? So legacy is one which will kind of stop your endurance. So then the cost of adoption increases significantly, because first step, you have to migrate your existing legacy application to something which will work on new age infrastructure, and then you have to get into the SDI kind of piece. That is one. So which means that when the business is taking a decision, they have to be fully cognizant that some part of their infrastructure will work on legacy and some will work on SDI, which creates in itself its own complexities of managing the environment. Secondly, if you look at it from a security and risk management perspective, right? One is, of course, the inherent security controls in a software kind of ecosystem. It's always easier to breach something which is built in software. But I would still say, okay, that is something. So if you look at most of the orchestration platforms that have evolved for SDI, they are all based on open source, right? And there's a large community which is working on it. So again, there are two kinds of thought processes when it comes to cybersecurity. Some say the more eyeballs that see the code, the lesser the vulnerability, because somebody will figure out something is wrong and they'll get fixed. If you look at the BFSI mindset, open source is a no-no, right? So that might become a kind of hindrance, because then you obviously cannot, because so far the traditional mindset of BFSI is we will develop whatever is our own, or we buy COTS, right? We buy off the shelf, right? So this kind of fits somewhere in between. It can be off the shelf. It is not totally open source. So again, that might become a kind of a point to argue with against the adoption of SDI. Third is again to do more with the operational aspects of cybersecurity, wherein earlier if you had to roll out a change, right? You had a change approval board, and then it will go there, and then it will sit, and then it will be like a 3-week process by the time the change is actually rolled out, which means that you are slower, but at the same time, your operational risk is much more mitigated. Now here, imagine an administrator just putting in a wrong config, or a developer releasing a wrong kind of release. Gone. It's a pain to roll back again, because here we're talking about DevOps, right? Which is where you're now having frameworks like DevSecOps come in, which kind of try to mitigate this, and you have more control over deploying change. So kind of diluting a little bit on the agility side, because when you talk about BFSI, that becomes very important. Unlike other organizations which are not that much under regulatory scrutiny, here it can result in a 100 crore fine, plus some things from RBI will come and show up at your door. So it's a completely different ecosystem. So when BFSI gets into these kind of technologies which are more agile, my view is that there should also be some levels of checks and balances, additional layer of controls which should be introduced, so as to protect the overall organization from a reputational or from an operational security risk. So these are the cons that of course need to be managed. But net, if you see, it's of course pros, and that's the reason why so many organizations worldwide have started up on this journey. And like Shiju said, probably adoption might just skyrocket in the next 2 to 3 years. And like you said, Dr. Sriram, early on, it might not be a choice, but you'll be kind of forced to adopt it. Otherwise, it will become a question of survival. So I think that will be the moot point here, and organizations will have to figure out a way to manage the cons that come as part of this package.
Certainly. Thank you very much, Naren. So obviously, as technology is racing ahead and mobility is increasing, 5G is coming. It's around the corner here, and in many parts of the world it is there. And of course, there are again other things like IoT and all, which are on the horizon and which will also soon come into the banking world. So one needs to be prepared. And in India and all, of course, we cannot sit in tier 1 cities and talk about what we have. There are tier 3, tier 2, tier 3 cities and rural areas also, where they use Jan Dhan, Aadhaar, eSeva, all of these services, and many of the healthcare and other agri-tech services and all those also, which rely on, which have a close link with banking and the loan parts, micro loans. Many of these things need to be taken into account. So obviously we'll need systems that are very resilient, secure, and scalable. So good thoughts there. I would move on to Sridhar.
Thank you, Dr. Sriram. I agree with both the panelists on the cons, with software-defined infrastructure. But I also think that there are very interesting ways to manage the cons such that it's a no-brainer to go into this path, right? So, for what you're trying to accomplish, especially you have to create a proactive bank, right? As opposed to how we've done banking over the last 30, 40 years. I think you can't go down that path. There's a lot of AI coming in, a lot of support you want to provide from the banking side to assist the customer. So you need a SDI infrastructure to do all of this. And as I said before, right, you want banks also to be able to do the innovation similar to the Facebooks, the Amazons, the Netflix, and the Google kind of companies. And, obviously having a Finovation platform, is how we've addressed this particular problem. So, when we go into a legacy deployment, a bank may have a number of line of business applications and core systems. And what we try to do is we try to, there's a concept of an exoskeleton where you don't come in and replace the legacy system fully, but you give superpowers to it, right? So we essentially, it's almost like an Iron Man suit where you can wear the suit and get a lot of powers. It's the same thing that you can do to a legacy system, right? So using this core XOS, the green dot, if you have 30 different line of business applications in your bank, you can decide to put these green dots in 10 of them. And now, if your card management system or your portfolio analysis or your CASA system can be brought into a unified control plane, and now all the microservices that we have, for instance, become accessible to these legacy systems, right? So we run both of them in parallel, but we are able to create a very sort of unified way of managing all of the new services, right? So obviously the applicability, right? There's a lot of benefits that come out of it, which is you can kind of as I think my panelists already talked about, co-panelists, you can manage the unpredictable growth spurts, Dr. Sriram, like you talked about in Diwali or Christmas or New Year, and you can do some very interesting work there. Now on the limitations, right? With the models that we've talked about, we've seen some good success, but I think the gaps are around tooling when it comes to storage, right? I think there are still a lot of gaps as we see in the market when it comes to software-defined storage, and also the virtual appliance for a number of financial scenarios, right? And I think in the next 12 to 18 months, you will see a lot of new functionalities coming out in this area. And I think, I'm very hopeful for what is possible in this market with all of this.
Okay. Excellent. Really, I really do not know why you are not yet targeting India market, but you should certainly think of targeting it, because a lot of good things will be used here. So we are almost at or a little bit over, but I'd like to ask just one little question here to each one of you. Rapid round fire is about talent. So there are some concerns that you bring in more sophisticated things. If something goes wrong, you need more and more experts to come in and then fix things. This is not. Is it moving towards what will happen to the talent side, meaning that you can do more with less talent, less skill, or is it that you need experts? So I'm around. Yeah, you first.
We missed a few words in last week which you said, but we understood that it's more from the talent which you are asking.
Perspective, yeah. Do we need more expert talent? What will happen to the talent landscape when you go with the AI?
Yeah, that's a bigger challenge actually, because today these software trends or any of the infrastructure trend or any of the application trends are changing so fast pace that adoption or the learning curves are not happening within the skill sets. So that remains always like a rat and mice game, because you will always have the technologies will be much more fast ahead, and the skill sets learning curve will be always delayed. Definitely for a organizations, financial institutions, or any other organizations, their core business may not be in terms of the technology servicing. So keeping those talent and skill sets becomes very challenging, because say for example, a small set of infrastructure which we manage, you cannot have a individual or independent uh, resources put out in terms of managing that piece. So obviously you'll have to look upon for a shared services, and shared services from the support of the partners or from the organization who can manage those sort of setup. Second, some of the niche solutions which we get as a delivery from some of the service providers, definitely we cannot have that sort of talent also. So yes, if you ask me, technology talents are very tough to get into the market. If you want to get few of the resources for some of the positions, you will get number of resumes, and you will see all the technologies which you are looking for in terms of the skills in the resources. But when you start interviewing, then you understand that he may have only attended a course, or he would have attended a webinar, or he would have read into some sorts of books, but in practical he would have never worked in. So he wants to learn at your cost. So that's the one biggest challenge which we always face as a fraternity. So I think skill
Okay.
set will always be there. But second request from the OEMs, when they come about with these sort of new solutions, ideally they should come up with some sort of certification programs or some sort of training programs. They do come, but definitely that's not very common available like in the days when in 90s when there were networking courses were all there. So I think that sort of things are missing, which OEM should promote more. So I think that's the missing thing. So today it's becomes very converged sort of solution. Say for example, HCI when it came in, hyperconverged. All the OEMs retain that skill sets with them only. They have never come up with some sort of certification programs wherein everyone could get it, because they are in a fear that if they give that technology informations to others, they may lose that ownership. So I think that's the fear I would.
Yeah.
But
I think we should democratize. There's a great deal of the need to if these questions are to become
absolutely.
popular. Very quickly, Narayanan, and then I'll move on to Sridhar. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think Shiju covered it well. So one is I would say quality talent. So talent
Mm.
is available dime a dozen, but yeah, when it comes to quality talent, it's a real question mark. Um, One of the biggest reasons for that is the very fast evolution. So, like if you look at 10 years ago, how many new technology elements did an engineer have to learn, right? So, and he can specialize in it. And they, to be fair to them, if I think if I put myself in their shoes, the technology used to last for at least 5 7 years. So he will go ahead and invest time, energy getting certified. Now the technology changes in less than 2 years. So they also kind of are not sure what will stay, what will not stay. So there is no real incentive for them to invest that kind of time and energy. And to see a lot of these guys moving around in the market who are very shallow, who have no depth. I think a lot of the first line of configuration or even the second line of configuration is getting replaced with automation. So what you will really have are kind of architects and managers rather than frontline engineers. This is the way I see shaping this entire ecosystem, because the core reason for SDI is automation, right? So the initial labor intensive work and which does not require too much of knowledge but requires more of config knowledge is getting automated. So automatically there is going to be a shift of the existing people to try to acquire skills which are more generic in nature. So what will happen is we will reach a level of abstraction. I think I've already encountered some people who have no clue of any concepts about networking, but they can set up an SD-WAN, they can set up virtualized network in an SDI environment. They have no clue about IP address, subnetting, nothing. They don't know the basics. So the real challenge will come, like you rightly said, when there is a big problem. So the way I see this shaping, you need to have those real experts who have done hands-on probably 15 years ago, who will become like the real stalwarts and sort out people, and they will be probably hired by the OEMs who build these kind of stacks because they'll need them, and the BFSI and the other consumer organizations will typically be having the kind of talent which is more at an architect level and kind of just managing the operations. So that's the way I see this shaping up.
Definitely, we will need real those kinds of champions to not only architect but to troubleshoot also, and that's a good case for introducing SDI into our college courses also. Okay, into the curriculum. Right from there, we can start building. Sridhar, your comments.
Sure. Dr. Sriram, I don't know if you programmed with punch cards. When I started my programming career, I worked with punch cards. And then, I, realized I needed to learn assembly line for me to be an effective engineer. Then came compilers, then we came assembly line. And my first job, I thought if I build anything other than a new operating system, that's shameful for me, right? So I was very lucky to have worked for Vinod Khosla in building a smartphone operating system for him 30 plus years ago, right? But what I've realized over the years, it's not about how many of these great technologies that in depth. I think in SDI, as Narayanan pointed out, a lot of things have been abstracted and a lot of automation has come in, right? And actually, my experience is quite the opposite, maybe given the markets I'm looking at. where the talent now is a lot more effective than, for instance, right? We work with a very large bank here, and to hire COBOL programmers to go update some of their legacy application is an impossible task, right? So for me to, sort of, if you compare how easy it is for me to hire a COBOL programmer to change a system, a mortgage lending system that a big bank here has, to what you can do with an SDI, I think SDI is sort of a walk in the park, right? I agree that there may be some issues in terms of learning and all of that, but I think that is typically sometimes based on the market that you're looking at. It's not SDI versus not SDI, So to me, I understand that there may be talent gaps and such, but I think SDI is, I think, the way to go, and I think you'll see a lot of value, in SDI even as your talent matures.
Sure. Thank you very much, Sridhar. Those were good insights. And of course, you certainly don't look like anyone who has worked initially with punch cards. That's the other secret. But okay. So thanks all. A brilliant, scintillating discussion. I hope they were very good takeaways for the audience. And do take note, as I always keep saying, it's not what you just hear, but what you take part. The takeaways and how you apply them. Okay. Thank you all. Excellent panel discussion. Bye.
Thank you, Dr. Sriram. Thank you, Shiju. Thank you, Sridhar.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Narayan. Thank you,
It was
Shiju.
very nice
Thank you,
hearing you
guys.
all. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah. Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Bye, guys.